Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and respected professional, a leadership development expert, and an expert in public speaking from Philadelphia, USA, Henna Pryor. Henna, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
Thank you. Henna is a workplace performance expert, and she's also a global keynote speaker. So, Henna, we're going to speak about leadership development and public speaking, but let me start by asking you, tell me about your own journey in brief.
Yes. So just for those that can't tell by my name, Henna is a Desi name. Pryor is my husband, my American husband's last name, but my parents are immigrants to the US. My dad is from India. My mom is from Pakistan. And I'm firstborn, first generation United States. And I think it's important to start there because, like many, I think my first career step was very informed by their guidance and suggestions. So I did not take heed of doctor, lawyer, engineer, but where we landed was public accounting. So I worked for Ernst & Young. Now they go by EY, large global firm, did that for several years and was good at it, but unfulfilled. So this led to career pivot number one, which was to executive search and staffing for 14 years. And in that role, I had a front row seat with what made teams successful, what made leaders effective, what made them have retention issues, what made people stay. And so that was a really fulfilling career for 14 years. Eventually led to career pivot number two, which was 2019. I moved into executive coaching, keynote speaking, writing, and that's what I do today.
Fabulous. Fabulous. So let's talk leadership development now. And my first question for you is, how do you define modern leadership in today's dynamic workplace?
Modern leaders have a very different job than years past. So I say that one of the absolute superpowers for a modern leader is being able to communicate effectively. Now, that underpins everything else as far as I'm concerned with leaders. You can be a vulnerable leader. You can be an empathetic leader. You can be a decisive leader. You can be a charming leader. You can be any kind of leader. But if the message you're sending to your people isn't congruent with all of those characteristics, then those are just words on a page, right? So, my personal take is that the modern leader has a lot more work to do, especially in the age of AI, especially in the age of technology, to double down on their own self-awareness and the way they communicate, both verbally and non-verbally, who they are with their teams. And so that to me is number one right now.
Well said. Well said. And Henna, given the changes that have happened in the workplace, especially post-COVID with hybrid work and work from home and so many other kind of different iterations are available, what in your view are some of the biggest challenges leaders face today?
Well, you are catching me, Ashutosh, on a very good timing because my team and I just completed our first ever of its kind national research study in the US, but I think it's a pretty good representation of what's happening globally on social muscles in the workplace. So I define social muscle as that initiation of conversations or asking for help or reaching out or having that tough dialogue. And our research found all kinds of interesting findings, but one of my favorite findings is that 84% of working Americans, now again, I think it's pretty safe representation, say that social muscle strength, so keeping our relationships healthy, communicating in a healthy way, is essential for navigating change at work. Okay, so that's 84% say this is important for navigating change at work. And yet 56% would prefer to work on a project alone rather than with a coworker. This to me is a really big disconnect. This is a big delta. We know the value of really working as a team, working as one, and yet we know the value of social collaboration, but we still prefer the comfort of what we started to have with COVID and what technology started to create, which is independent work, even more so for high achievers who are like head down, do a good job. So this to me right now is one of the greatest challenges that we're seeing in modern teams.
Fascinating. Great response. Thank you. And what, in your view, are some of the critical leadership mindsets that are needed to drive performance?
There's one that I think is the biggest, and that is the willingness to have a beginner's mindset over and over.
Hmm.
The world is changing so fast.
Mm.
So fast. One of the quotes I often say in my keynote talks is experts today fail because they are experts in a world that no longer exists.
Hmm. Well
The
said.
world is changing too fast. Your
Mm.
skills that may have served you in your first stage of leadership, your second stage, they may not be the primary skills for the
Mm.
leadership that you need to display or exhibit or display today. And
Mm.
so I think those who have the humility and frankly the self-awareness to step into a beginner's mind daily,
Mm.
obviously use your expertise, use your competence, but simultaneously holding the tension of I don't know what I don't know. These generations, Gen Z, millennials, they view things very differently than we
Mm.
do. And so I
Mm.
think that mindset is going to take leaders very far right now.
Well said. Well said. And what, in your view, is the role of emotional intelligence
Mm.
in effective leadership?
Yeah, it's everything. It's
Hmm.
everything. I mean, if I can underline and put a pom pom up, and, I think that leaders who lack emotional intelligence, the younger generations of workers don't have much tolerance for it anymore. So if you are someone who cannot look inward and identify some of your own things, especially as they are brought up to you,
Hmm.
right? I understand that everyone has different layers of awareness around their emotional regulation, their emotional reactions. What I try to explain to leaders is, when we talk about emotional intelligence, it's about having the awareness. It's about
Hmm.
being able to manage your own emotions. And regulation of emotions doesn't mean not feeling them. You
Mm.
can feel frustrated.
Yeah.
You can feel confused. You can feel discouraged. You can feel
Mm.
all of those things. But what it means is having the space
Mm.
to reflect before responding.
Mm.
And these days, I think there's very little tolerance, especially from more well-attuned generations,
Hmm.
for someone who flies off the handle
Yeah.
without taking a moment to reflect. And so I
Mm.
think for the modern leader, it's non-negotiable at this
Mm.
point.
Well said. And my next question is, how can leaders help their teams to navigate discomfort and awkward
Mm.
situations?
I could spend 2 hours talking about this. Well, number one is to
Mm.
normalize them.
Mhm.
Normalize them. I think one of the biggest challenges that has come from the world going increasingly remote, increasingly hybrid, is
Mm.
that we don't as regularly see each other
Mm.
mess up or see each other have a blunder or see each other fall down. We're still doing it with the
Mm.
same regularity, sometimes at the same intensity, but we're not seeing others do that. And so,
Mm.
whether we mean to or not, we're starting to condition ourselves to think, well, I must be the only one.
Mm.
I must be the only one who doesn't understand or made a fool of myself or made this silly decision. You are not the only one. So I
Mm.
first advise leaders make space for this conversation,
Mhm.
normalize it. So
Mm.
one of the exercises I prescribe to leaders is I'll say, hey, at the beginning of your next meeting, your next team meeting, spend just 5 minutes. I don't need 30 minutes. Spend
Mm.
5 minutes and share cracked egg stories,
Mhm.
right? These are stories of everyone just share one time that they had a misstep this week,
Mhm.
a mistake, a
Mm.
blunder.
Mm.
I have another friend who recently referred to it as the glitch report,
Mhm.
right? Like, what is
Mm.
one thing where you had a royal mess up? This
Right.
becomes normalizing embarrassment, normalizing
Mm.
the discomfort that comes with
Mm.
trying and growing. But when we don't normalize,
Mm.
people won't feel it's safe to speak up, and then we end up pushing things under the rug.
Well said. And therefore, a follow-up question for you on the glitch report or on the
Yeah,
cracked
cracked egg.
egg
Yeah.
situation is how can leaders create an environment where failure is seen as a learning opportunity?
Yeah. Model it first.
Mhm.
That's the short answer is if you're not willing to publicly admit your missteps, your knowledge gaps of I have no idea the answer to this, or I
Mm.
really did not have a successful, discussion with that client. He did not react the way that I hoped. That
Mm.
was very uncomfortable for me. If we are
Mm.
not able to model, you can say it as much as you like. You can
Mm.
say this is a psychologically safe environment. You can
Right.
say all of that. There's an expression I came up with recently that seems to be resonating in the leadership circles. I refer
Hmm.
to it as bird song leadership.
Hmm.
So there's a whole, I write an article for Inc. magazine. So if anyone wants to Google Birdsong Leadership Inc. magazine, they'll find my article. But the premise is this: I learned that birds don't sing when
Hmm.
there are predators around.
Hmm.
So if there are predators lurking, you will not hear anything. It will be silent. Birds only sing when the landscape around them is free of predators. So
Hmm.
we as humans have learned
Hmm.
to associate the sound of birds singing
Hmm.
as relaxing,
Yeah.
as soothing, because at a very reptilian level, or, in
Yeah.
our brains, we associate that with it's safe here.
Yeah.
There's no predators around.
Hmm.
Leaders can do the same thing,
Hmm.
right? What is their version of creating bird song so that people, not just by being told it's safe here, but they can kind of feel, they can embody, they can in the air sense it's safe here. Leaders need to create that experience.
Very well said. So, one more question relating to leadership development, and then we'll move to public speaking.
Sure.
Hannah, what are some practical tips for leaders to build trust and influence within their
Mm,
own teams?
yeah. One of my most popular keynotes is on the changing psychology of influence. And I
Hmm.
say changing because it has changed. We
Hmm.
are all Google experts now,
Hmm.
right? It's not that we know more than we did. It's
Correct.
that we
Correct.
think we think we know
Hmm.
more because
Hmm.
there's so much
Hmm.
information.
Hmm.
Add to that, something that happened 5 years ago is we
Hmm.
all experienced this global thing where our tolerance for people who don't understand us has gone
Hmm.
down.
Right.
When we feel like someone doesn't get us or they're coming at us too hard without seeing our perspective, we shut down a lot more quickly than we used to.
Hmm.
So for leaders today, trust and influence boils down to a much deeper understanding of
Hmm.
other people. What
Hmm.
are they thinking? What are they feeling? A lot of leaders think that they have empathy. They
Hmm.
think they're good at taking perspective. But what I try to teach them is we are often not going nearly deep enough. So I'll
Hmm.
just give you one example. If you want to influence someone who is in inertia, status quo bias.
Yeah.
So let's say, Ashutosh, I would like you to try this new software. And you say, Henna, we've always used this other software. If it's not broken, why
Hmm.
would we fix
Graphics.
it?
Yeah.
Why would we change?
Hmm.
And I keep telling you, but did you see this data? And did you want to do the demo? And you want to do the case study? You would be so annoyed. You're like, no, no,
Hmm.
no, like enough. I don't want this anymore.
Yeah.
Instead, if I said, listen, this is very different.
Hmm.
And I understand that changing it might put a spotlight on your reputation. Why is he making this decision? And what if we tried this as a tiny little experiment, right? Maybe
Hmm.
let's just try it with one client instead of
Hmm.
switching it all at once. All of a sudden, we're having a very different conversation because I had the opportunity to learn what's holding him
Hmm.
is something very different
Hmm.
than me just giving facts and figures. And
Hmm.
so I think today, the people who understand people, the leaders who understand the people that they serve,
Hmm.
will always win. That's how we create trust and influence.
Yeah, great response. Thank you. So let's now talk about public speaking. And you are a
Sure.
global keynote speaker and have
Mhm.
a lot of expertise. My first question to you, Henna, is how did you get into public speaking and what motivated you to pursue this as a career or a profession?
It surprised me as much as anyone, but not really. So I'll answer this way. When I left my corporate career in 2019, I actually pursued executive coaching. I went and got my certification at American University in DC. So I was doing one-on-one coaching with leaders and executives.
Hmm.
And frankly, very organically, they said to me, Hannah, what we did together was very useful. I would love if you could come do this with my team. I would
Hmm.
love if we could have a similar session with my department. I
Hmm.
would love it. And very organically, it turned into department, larger group. Can you please come speak at our annual conference in front of 1,500 people? So
Hmm.
it was very organic, but I will also say that I'm the only one who was surprised by this. My
Hmm.
mother, my father, my sister. I was the keynote speaker at my grad school commencement ceremony. I
Wow.
was the MC of my high school fashion show. So
Hmm. Hmm.
for them, they're like, there was part of you that always had this in
Hmm.
you.
Hmm.
What eventually made me do it, frankly, was getting over the imposter thoughts
Hmm.
that I don't have something valuable to say.
Right.
That was the hardest part. And once I finally
Mm.
trusted myself that I do have something
Hmm.
valuable to provide to executives and leaders who are sometimes 20, 30 years my senior,
Hmm.
then I was able to really step into this career fully.
Amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
And based on all the work that you do in supporting people to become better public speakers, what are
Mm.
some common mistakes you have seen speakers make, and how can these be avoided?
Mm. Probably the most common mistake is that when we feel super nervous or full of self-doubt, is we put too much of the spotlight on ourselves.
Hmm.
Now, this sounds counterintuitive because you're like, Hannah, the spotlight is on me. I'm literally the one on stage. I'm
Yeah.
literally the one in front of the group. But the truth is, when we have that mentality of everyone is just staring at me and picking apart my words, it is very easy to be nervous. So, a
Hmm.
common adage in the public speaking circles is it's hard to be nervous when you're in service.
Hmm.
So, stop worrying about being good, be more worried about being helpful. Stand up in front of others and think not how can I be good? How can I be helpful? It's
Hmm.
much harder to be nervous when you're in service. So that would be my
Hmm.
number one tip
Amazing.
to manage it.
Amazing. And a lot of people, and I've spoken to many who say that when they go on stage, they find it very difficult to handle stage fright.
Hmm.
And no matter how senior they may be or how
Yeah.
well established they may be, what are your thoughts on how to handle stage fright or anxiety before a big
Mm-hmm.
audience?
I'll give three specific steps that I would take somebody through. Number one is, do they have a self-talk practice?
Hmm.
Do not sleep on the power of self talk. Every time I go on stage, I have a self talk routine.
Hmm.
Hear yourself say the words, Henna, you've got this. Henna, you're prepared. You're here to serve. You're
Hmm.
here to be helpful to the people in the room. It's
Hmm.
not about what you're wearing, how you say it. It's about how much value can you bring. You can
Yeah.
do this, right? Self
Hmm.
talk practice number one. Number two is stage fright tends to come from A, I think the spotlight is on me too much, but
Hmm.
B, it tends to be really multiplied when we don't feel prepared. One
Hmm.
of the best way to overcome stage fright is rehearse.
Correct.
Rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. All
Hmm.
professional keynote speakers rehearse a lot.
Yeah.
Why would it be different for you, right?
Hmm.
Same thing. The more you get the ideas and the concepts into your body, the
Hmm.
more easy it will be to feel like you've done this before, right? Your
Correct.
brain literally deepens neural grooves. You've been
Hmm.
down this road before.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
rehearse. And number three is just definitely make a practice to use your body and your breath in a
Hmm.
way that feels organic to you. Even as a speaker, when my stages are especially large or my audience is big, I still get nervous. I
Hmm.
wouldn't call it paralyzing
Yeah.
stage fright, but I still get nervous.
Hmm.
So before I go on, I take some deep breaths, I do some jumping jacks. And if I get nervous in the middle, I might squeeze my hands behind my back,
Hmm.
right? Release nervous energy. And sometimes I will forget what I was
Hmm.
supposed to
Yeah.
say. And
Hmm.
you know what you do in that moment? You say, this is embarrassing, but I've lost my place. Can someone help me find it again? Your
Hmm.
audience is more than happy to help bring you back. And in fact, that makes them feel connected to you because we're all human. We're
Yeah.
all human. We're all going to do it.
Yeah. And that is such a powerful tip. This is the first time I've heard anyone say, you ask the audience, help me find my place again. And what a great way
Hmm.
to connect with the audience. Thank you.
Yeah.
Uh, my next question for you is storytelling. And I
Mm.
know storytelling has always been important, but how do you incorporate storytelling in a presentation or in a public speaking situation where you're addressing a large gathering?
Yeah, I try to make sure that there's always at least, 3 to 4 stories in every presentation that I give. And the truth
Mm,
is, it's not about being, this amazing teller of stories for the
mm,
sake of it. It's about the fact that humans are more likely to retain the information that you share
mm,
when you deliver it through a story or an example or an anecdote, because our
mm,
brains then simulate the event. So
mm,
I can deliver facts and figures about, by using this product, this
mm,
person saved 30% of time and productivity. Or I could say, because they use this new system, this worker who has young kids at home and was barely getting home on time because they were saving 30% of their time, was
mm,
able to get home for dinner every night. Wife was gleaming with a big hug on the way home.
mm,
It actually lights up a different part of your brain.
mhm,
So story doesn't have to be a full, beginning, middle, and end or happily ever after. It can be just little examples and little
Correct.
anecdotes,
Mm.
but just incorporating more of that to every little data point or statistic. It makes it real. It makes it memorable. It makes us perk up and pay attention. So storytelling is a superpower in the
Wow,
communication
absolutely.
sphere.
Well said. I have time for two more questions for you.
Right. Okay.
Um, how do you tailor your talks
Mm.
to connect with different types of audiences?
I do not fully customize my talks.
Okay.
I would say I customize 20% of my talks. And so let
Mm-hmm.
me explain what I mean by this. When someone hires a speaker, or if they are looking to bring in a speaker, typically the reason they're looking to bring in that person is because they saw something they liked before,
Mm.
right? They either heard that somebody gave a great talk or they saw that they had a great perspective on something. And so what people actually want
Mm-hmm.
is to know that that topic is going to be, at least from a fundamentals level, 80% the same. They
Mm.
don't want me to make up something brand new on the
Mm.
fly that I'm
Mm.
figuring it out as I go. So a lot
Mm.
of times my workshops, my keynotes are 80% the content is sort of built.
Mm-hmm.
Then the other 20, or maybe a 75%, 20, 25% is where I have the opportunity to say, let's talk about the challenges unique to this industry. What are some of
Mm.
the things that you in the audience would say you're struggling with? How
Mm.
would we pull some examples from that industry? And frankly, that 20% makes the entire talk feel extremely custom.
Mm.
But I think, again, it goes back to what I said about rehearsal. If I'm 100% customizing every single time, how
Mm.
can I deliver at a level of excellence? I
Mm.
can't.
Yeah,
So about 20% ends up being customized.
great response. And my last question for you, what are your tips for all our viewers and listeners to ensure a presentation or a talk has
Mm.
actionable takeaways for the audience?
Mm. When it comes to actionable takeaways, it's not enough to say, do X better. I think the most we can do is to be specific about what is their next right step. So when I think about takeaways, I tell presenters, think about timelines.
Mm.
So what is their next step that they can do within 24 hours?
Mm.
What is their next step that they might consider within a week? And then what do they want to think about in 6 months when they're
Mm.
revisiting their notes, right?
Yeah.
Make
Mm.
sure your takeaways encompass a little bit of all of that. And for them, again, specific is better. You want to make sure you don't alienate somebody in the audience. But if part of their takeaway, for example, is, have one new tough conversation with someone that you need to have that you've been dreading,
Mm.
that's good. That's a very actionable takeaway. But it could be that for somebody who's a bit more introverted and needs more time,
Mhm.
for you, it might be formulating your game plan for how that tough conversation is going to go, rehearsing some of your talk tracks. For someone else who time is the issue, it could be blocking it on the calendar. But
Mm.
specificity is key, because otherwise, people, when they have a big loosey goosey takeaway, they struggle to
Yeah.
implement. We're all too distracted.
Mm. Well said. And on that note, Hannah, I just want to say thank you so much for speaking to me about your own journey. I think we had a great conversation on leadership development. You gave me some incredible pointers on the biggest challenges leaders face today. What are some of the critical leadership mindsets? You also gave us some very interesting thoughts on how failure can be seen as a learning opportunity. We spoke about emotional intelligence and also for navigating uncomfortable or awkward situations. We also spoke about public speaking, and I thought some of your points were really amazing. And I'm sure my viewers and listeners will take away some great points about whether you got to clench your hands behind you if you're feeling nervous, or reaching out to the audience if you suddenly lose your chain of thought. I also loved your the bird singing story.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for speaking to me, and all the very best to you.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.